Bear cub tangled in a farmer's irrigation pivot sprayer. What this baby did was shocking. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. The morning sun painted the vast Nebraska farmland in golden hues, but something felt different today. Zara Whitlock sat on her weathered porch, her 18-month-old daughter Iris babbling softly in her lap. The massive irrigation pivot sprayer stretched across their wheat field like a giant mechanical spider, its long metal arms reaching toward the horizon. Zara's husband Marcus had left early for town, promising to return with supplies for their struggling farm. Money was tight, and the recent drought had pushed them to the edge of bankruptcy. The pivot sprayer was their lifeline, the only thing keeping their crops alive in this merciless heat. Little Iris suddenly stopped playing with her cloth doll and pointed toward the field. Her tiny finger trembled as she made soft cooing sounds, her bright blue eyes fixed on something moving near the sprayer's base. "What is it, sweetheart?" Zara whispered, following her daughter's gaze. At first, she saw nothing unusual. The sprayer hummed its familiar tune, water droplets catching the sunlight like scattered diamonds. But then she spotted it, a small, dark shape moving between the metal supports. Her heart skipped a beat when she realized what it was. A bear cub, no bigger than a medium-sized dog, was wandering dangerously close to the massive machinery. Its thick black fur was matted with dust, and it moved with the unsteady gait of a very young animal. The cub seemed fascinated by the sprayer's mechanical sounds, pawing at the hanging hoses with innocent curiosity. Zara's blood ran cold. Where there was a cub, there was usually a mother bear nearby. She clutched Iris tighter, her mind racing with possibilities. Should she call for help? The nearest neighbor was miles away, and Marcus wouldn't return for hours. The cub continued its exploration, completely unaware of the danger it was approaching. The pivot sprayer was programmed to move automatically, its massive frame slowly rotating across the field. If the cub got caught in its path... Iris made another soft sound, and Zara noticed something that made her breath catch. Her daughter wasn't afraid. Instead, the baby's eyes were filled with something that looked almost like recognition, as if she understood the cub's innocent wonder. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying with it a scent that made Zara's hands shake. It was the musky, wild smell of a large animal. Somewhere in the nearby woods, the mother bear was likely searching for her missing cub. As if sensing her mother's tension, Iris began to fuss, her small hands reaching toward the field where the cub continued its dangerous game with the sprayer's mechanisms. The baby's cries seemed to echo across the empty farmland, creating an eerie harmony with the mechanical sounds of the irrigation system. Zara stood slowly, her legs unsteady beneath her. She needed to do something, but what? One wrong move could put both her daughter and the bear cub in even greater danger. The morning that had started so peacefully was quickly becoming a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. The cub stumbled closer to the sprayer's main support beam, its playful curiosity drawing it deeper into a trap it couldn't possibly understand. Just then, the irrigation system's timer clicked with a mechanical sound that echoed across the field. Zara's heart dropped as she realized what was about to happen. The massive sprayer was programmed to begin its next rotation cycle in exactly 3 minutes. The metal arms would start moving, and anything caught in their path would be crushed or dragged along the muddy ground. The bear cub had no idea of the danger approaching. It continued to play with the hanging water hoses, batting at them with its tiny paws like a kitten with yarn. One of the thicker hoses had somehow wrapped around its back leg, but the cub seemed to think it was just another game. Zara took a step forward, then stopped. Moving closer might scare the cub into running deeper into the sprayer's framework. Or worse, it might bring the mother bear charging out of the woods. She glanced at Iris, who had grown strangely quiet in her arms. The baby's eyes were locked on the cub with an intensity that seemed impossible for such a young child. "Mama," Iris whispered, one of her first clear words. But she wasn't looking at Zara. She was staring directly at the bear cub, her small hand reaching out as if trying to touch something far beyond her reach. A chill ran down Zara's spine. How could her daughter know that word in this context? Iris had never seen a bear before, never even seen pictures of bear families. Yet, something in the baby's expression suggested she understood exactly what she was looking at. A lost child searching for its mother. The mechanical timer clicked again. 2 minutes remaining. Suddenly, the cub's playful movements became frantic. The hose around its leg had tightened as it moved, and now the young animal was truly trapped. Its small whimpers carried across the field, high-pitched and desperate. The sound triggered something primal in Zara's chest, the same protective instinct she felt when Iris cried. But it also triggered something else. From deep within the pine forest that bordered their property came an answering call, a low, rumbling growl that made the hair on Zara's arms stand up. The mother bear had heard her cub's distress. Iris began making soft cooing sounds, the same noises she made when trying to comfort her stuffed animals. But these sounds were different somehow, more urgent and purposeful. As impossible as it seemed, the baby appeared to be trying to communicate with the trapped cub. The growling from the forest grew closer. Through the trees, Zara caught glimpses of a massive, dark shape moving with surprising speed. The mother bear was huge, easily 3 times the size of the cub, and she was heading straight for the irrigation sprayer where her baby was trapped. 1 minute and 30 seconds until the sprayer began its deadly rotation. Zara's mind raced through impossible choices. If she ran inside and called for help, it would be too late. If she approached the cub herself, she might become trapped between a desperate mother bear and dangerous machinery. But if she did nothing, she would have to watch an innocent creature die while her own daughter somehow seemed to understand the tragedy unfolding. The cub's whimpers grew more desperate. It had managed to wrap a second hose around its front paw while trying to free its back leg. Now, it was more tangled than before, suspended awkwardly between 2 water lines with its small body stretched painfully. Iris suddenly let out a sharp cry that cut through the morning air like a knife. It wasn't her normal baby babble, or even a typical cry of distress. It was something else entirely, a sound that seemed to pierce straight through to the heart of every living thing within hearing distance. The effect was immediate and startling. The bear cub stopped struggling and turned its small black head toward the porch where Zara and Iris stood. For a moment, the 2 babies, one human, one wild, stared at each other across the impossible distance of species and understanding. But more shocking was what happened next. The crashing sounds from the forest stopped abruptly. The mother bear's growling ceased, replaced by complete silence that felt heavy and unnatural. 45 seconds until the sprayer moved. Zara felt her legs moving before her mind caught up with her decision. Still holding Iris tightly, she began walking toward the field, her bare feet finding their way across the uneven ground. Every instinct screamed at her to run in the opposite direction, but something stronger pulled her forward. As she approached the irrigation sprayer, she could see the mechanical gears beginning to engage. The massive steel framework shuddered slightly, preparing for movement. Steam rose from the engine housing as the diesel motor increased its power output. The bear cub hung helplessly in its tangle of hoses, its dark eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. Up close, Zara could see that it was even younger than she had thought. probably only a few months old, still dependent on its mother for survival. 20 seconds. That's when she saw something that made her stop breathing entirely. At the edge of the forest, partially hidden behind a massive oak tree, stood the mother bear. But she wasn't charging forward in a rage as Zara had expected. Instead, the huge animal was perfectly still, watching. Her intelligent brown eyes moved from her trapped cub to the human woman holding a baby, then back again. The mother bear was waiting. But waiting for what? 10 seconds. Iris wiggled in Zara's arms, her small hands reaching toward the trapped cub with determination that seemed impossible for someone so young. The baby made more of those strange, purposeful sounds, and incredibly, the bear cub responded with softer whimpers, as if the two were actually communicating. 5 seconds. The sprayer's engine roared to life with full power. The massive metal arms began their slow but unstoppable rotation across the field. In moments, they would reach the spot where the bear cub hung helplessly in its tangle of irrigation hoses. Zara closed her eyes and made a choice that would change everything. She lunged forward, dropping to her knees beside the irrigation sprayer just as the massive metal arm began its deadly sweep. With Iris still clutched in one arm, she reached out with her free hand toward the tangled bear cub. Her fingers found the thick rubber hose wrapped around the cub's back leg and began working desperately to loosen it. The bear cub's fur was softer than she expected, warm and surprisingly clean despite its dusty appearance. As her hands worked to free the frightened animal, she could feel its rapid heartbeat through its small rib cage. The cub had stopped whimpering and was now perfectly still, as if it understood that this strange human was trying to help. Behind her, she heard the mother bear take a single step forward, then stop again. Zara didn't dare turn around. She could feel the massive animal's presence like a weight pressing against her back. Could smell the wild scent of the forest that clung to the bear's fur. The irrigation arm was moving faster now, its metal supports creaking ominously as they approached. Zara's fingers worked frantically at the hose knots, but they had tightened from the cub's struggles. Water pressure from the system made the rubber slippery and difficult to grip. Come on," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the mechanical sounds. That's when Iris did something that made Zara's blood freeze. The baby reached out her tiny hand and placed it directly on the bear cub's head. The moment their skin made contact, something extraordinary happened. The cub's eyes closed, and its entire body relaxed. The frantic energy that had been making it struggle against its bonds simply vanished, replaced by a calm so profound it seemed almost magical. More incredibly, the relaxation seemed to flow from the cub to Iris, and from Iris to Zara herself. Zara's shaking hands steadied. Her panicked breathing slowed. With a clarity she hadn't felt moments before, she could see exactly how to untangle the hoses. Her fingers moved with sudden precision, finding the right pressure points to release the knots. The irrigation arm was only 10 feet away now, its metal bulk casting a shadow over them. But Zara felt no fear, only a strange sense of rightness, as if this moment had been waiting for her entire life. The first hose came free with a soft pop. The bear cub's back leg dropped to the ground, and it immediately tried to stand. But the second hose, wrapped around its front paw, held firm. This knot was tighter, pulled almost impossibly tight by the cub's earlier struggles. 7 feet away. The metal arm's shadow covered them completely now. Zara pulled at the hose with all her strength, but it wouldn't budge. The rubber had compressed under pressure, creating a knot that seemed designed to hold forever. Sweat dripped into her eyes as she worked, blurring her vision. 5 feet. That's when she heard it. A low, rumbling sound that vibrated through the ground beneath her knees. But it wasn't the sound of the approaching irrigation arm. It was coming from behind her, from the mother bear. The massive animal was humming. It was the strangest sound Zara had ever heard, a deep, melodic vibration that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than the bear's throat. The sound wrapped around them like a blanket, and incredibly, Iris began to hum back. Her baby voice created a higher harmony that blended perfectly with the mother bear's bass notes. The bear cub's eyes opened, and it began to hum, too, its small voice adding a middle tone to the impossible song. And then, without understanding why, Zara found herself joining in, her own voice completing a chord that seemed to resonate with the very earth beneath them. 3 feet. The hose knot suddenly loosened in her hands, sliding free as if it had been waiting for the right moment. The bear cub tumbled forward, finally free, and immediately scrambled toward its mother. But instead of running away, it stopped and turned back toward Zara and Iris. The irrigation arm was so close now that Zara could see the individual water droplets spraying from its nozzles. She had seconds to get herself and Iris to safety, but as she tried to stand, her legs wouldn't cooperate. The adrenaline that had carried her this far suddenly abandoned her, leaving her weak and shaking. The bear cub made a decision that defied everything Zara thought she knew about wild animals. Instead of fleeing to safety, it moved back toward her, pressing its small body against her side. Using its surprising strength, the cub began pushing against her leg, trying to help her stand. 1 foot away, Zara found her strength and lunged backward, clutching Iris to her chest. The bear cub stayed beside her, matching her movements perfectly. Together, they tumbled away from the irrigation sprayer just as the massive metal arm swept through the exact spot where they had been kneeling. They landed in a heap on the soft earth. Zara, Iris, and the bear cub all tangled together in a pile of arms, legs, and fur. For a moment, nobody moved. The irrigation sprayer continued its mechanical journey across the field, unaware of the drama it had nearly caused. Then Iris began to giggle. It started as a small chuckle, but grew into the kind of delighted laughter that only babies can produce. The bear cub, apparently deciding that laughter was a wonderful thing, began to make similar sounds. A huffing, snorting noise that was unmistakably joy. Zara couldn't help herself. Despite everything that had just happened, despite the impossibility of the situation, she began to laugh too. The 3 of them lay there in the dirt, laughing together as if they were old friends who had just shared the world's best joke. That's when the mother bear approached. She moved slowly, her massive paws making no sound on the soft earth. Up close, she was even larger than Zara had imagined, easily 6 feet tall even while walking on all 4s. Her brown fur was thick and glossy, and her eyes held an intelligence that was almost human. Zara's laughter died in her throat. This was the moment of truth. Would the mother bear see her as a threat who had touched her cub, or as a helper who had saved its life? The great bear stopped just inches away from where they lay. She lowered her enormous head until her nose was almost touching Iris's face. Zara held her breath, every muscle in her body tense with the possibility of having to protect her daughter. But the mother bear simply sniffed gently at Iris's hair, her massive nostrils flaring slightly. Then she made a sound that was impossible to describe. Part growl, part purr, part something else entirely. It sounded almost like she was saying, "Thank you." Iris reached up with one tiny hand and touched the bear's wet nose. The contact lasted only a second, but in that moment Zara saw something pass between them, some kind of understanding that transcended species and language. The mother bear stepped back and made a soft sound to her cub. The little one immediately scrambled to its feet and trotted to her side. But before they turned to leave, both bears did something that made Zara question everything she thought she knew about the natural world. They bowed. Not the casual head dip that animals sometimes make, but a deliberate, formal bow that was unmistakably a gesture of respect and gratitude. The mother bear lowered her massive head until it almost touched the ground, and her cub mimicked the movement exactly. Then, without another sound, they turned and walked back toward the forest. But they didn't hurry, and they didn't look back with fear. They moved with the dignity of creatures who had participated in something sacred. Zara and Iris watched until the bears disappeared into the shadows between the trees. Only then did Zara realize that her hands were shaking again, not from fear this time, but from the magnitude of what had just occurred. She looked down at Iris, expecting to see the normal expression of a baby who had just experienced something far beyond her understanding. Instead, she found her daughter looking back at her with eyes that seemed far too wise for someone so young. "Mama," Iris said clearly, reaching up to touch Zara's face. "Mama, help." It was the most complete sentence her daughter had ever spoken, and somehow Zara knew it wasn't just about what had happened with the bears. Iris was talking about something bigger, something that connected all mothers everywhere, human, bear, and everything in between. The irrigation sprayer continued its slow journey across the field, water droplets catching the sunlight like scattered diamonds. But now, the mechanical sound seemed different to Zara's ears, less like the noise of a machine, and more like part of a larger song that included bear cubs and babies, and mothers who would do anything to protect the ones they loved. As she picked up Iris and started walking back toward the house, Zara noticed something that made her stop in her tracks. In the soft earth where they had lain together, there were 4 sets of prints: her own, Iris's tiny feet, and the paw prints of 2 bears. But around all of them, pressed into the dirt in a perfect circle, was something else entirely. The marks looked like symbols, but not any language Zara had ever seen. They were pressed deep into the earth as if made by something heavy, but there had been nothing else there during the rescue. The symbols formed a complete ring around their footprints, each mark identical to the others, each one pointing inward toward the center where they had all lain together. Zara knelt down for a closer look, still holding Iris. The baby immediately began babbling excitedly, her small hands reaching toward the strange markings. As Iris's fingers got closer to one of the symbols, it began to glow with a soft, warm light. "What in the world?" Zara whispered, but her words were cut off by the sound of a truck engine rumbling up their long driveway. Marcus was home early. Zara's husband jumped out of his pickup truck with a worried expression on his weathered face. He had obviously been driving fast, and his usually calm demeanor was replaced by something that looked almost like panic. "Zara, are you and Iris okay?" he called out as he ran toward them. "I got the strangest feeling on my way back from town, like something was wrong here, like you both were in danger." Zara looked down at the glowing symbols, then back at her husband's concerned face. How could she possibly explain what had just happened? How could she tell him that their baby daughter had somehow communicated with wild bears, that they had all hummed together in impossible harmony, that mysterious symbols were now glowing in their dirt? "We're fine," she said slowly, not sure if that was entirely true. "But Marcus, something incredible happened. Something that I'm not sure I understand myself." Marcus reached them and immediately wrapped both his wife and daughter in a fierce hug. As his arms encircled them, the glowing symbols in the dirt suddenly flared brighter, pulsing with a rhythm that matched their heartbeats. "What is that?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper, as he stared at the impossible sight. Before Zara could answer, Iris made one of her purposeful sounds and pointed toward the forest. Following her daughter's gaze, Zara saw that the mother bear and her cub had returned. They stood at the edge of the tree line, perfectly still, watching the small family reunion. But they weren't alone. Behind them, barely visible in the shadows between the trees, were other shapes. More bears, but also something else. Zara squinted, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. There were deer, their white tails flicking nervously. A family of raccoons sat on a fallen log, their masked faces turned toward the farmhouse. High in the branches above, she could see the silhouettes of owls and hawks, natural enemies sitting peacefully, side by side. "Marcus," Zara breathed, "look at the forest." Her husband followed her gaze and let out a low whistle of amazement. "In 30 years of farming this land, I've never seen anything like that. It's like every animal for miles around has come to watch us." As if responding to his words, more animals emerged from deeper in the woods. A red fox trotted out from behind a tree, followed by a family of skunks. Even a lone coyote appeared, sitting calmly among the other creatures as if predator and prey had agreed to some kind of temporary truce. Iris clapped her hands together and made a sound of pure delight. The moment her small palms met, every animal in the forest moved forward 3 steps in perfect unison. Then they stopped, creating a semicircle around the edge of the farmyard. "This isn't natural," Marcus said, but his voice held wonder rather than fear. "Animals don't behave like this. They don't gather together like some kind of audience." The glowing symbols in the dirt pulsed brighter, and suddenly Zara understood something that made her heart race with possibility and terror in equal measure. "They're not just watching us, Marcus. They're waiting for something. And I think it has to do with Iris." As if she had heard her name, Iris looked up at her parents with those impossibly wise eyes. Then she did something that made both adults gasp. She spoke in a clear, strong voice that sounded nothing like her usual baby babble. "The old agreements are awakening," Iris said in words that were far too advanced for an 18-month-old child. "The barriers between worlds grow thin when love conquers fear." Marcus stumbled backward, his face pale with shock. "Zara, that's not possible. Babies don't talk like that. They don't even understand concepts like that." But Zara was staring at her daughter with a growing sense of recognition. The strange wisdom in Iris's eyes, her ability to communicate with the bear cub, the way she had known exactly when to reach out and calm the frightened animal. It all began to make a terrible kind of sense. "What old agreements?" Zara asked softly, speaking directly to her daughter as if addressing an adult. Iris smiled, and for a moment she looked like any normal baby. But when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of something far older than her tiny body. "Long ago, before cities and farms, humans and animals shared the same language, the same understanding. We were family then, all children of the same earth. But fear grew between us and the old bonds were forgotten." The animals at the forest's edge moved closer, their eyes fixed on the glowing baby in Zara's arms. Even the mother bear approached, no longer cautious but drawn by something she couldn't resist. "Today, when you chose love over fear, when you risked everything to save one small life, you began to heal what was broken," Iris continued. "The earth itself remembers and it sings with joy." Marcus sank to his knees beside the glowing symbols, his practical farmer's mind struggling to accept what his eyes were seeing. "This is impossible. Our daughter is 18 months old. She was saying single words yesterday." "Was she?" Zara asked, memories flooding back. "Or were we just not ready to hear what she was really saying?" She thought about all the times Iris had seemed to understand things beyond her age, the way she had always been drawn to animals, how she could calm any creature just by being near it. The signs had been there all along, but Zara had dismissed them as the normal mysteries of child development. The mother bear was close enough now that Zara could see the intelligence shining in her brown eyes. The great animal lowered her head respectfully and made that same impossible sound, part growl, part purr, part something that transcended animal communication. Iris responded immediately, making sounds that seemed to match the bear's perfectly. They were having a conversation, Zara realized with a shock that went straight to her bones. Her baby daughter was speaking fluent bear. "What is she saying?" Marcus whispered. Before Iris could answer, the conversation expanded. The deer stepped forward and added their voices, soft musical sounds that somehow fit perfectly with the bear's deep tones and Iris's baby words. The raccoons chattered in rhythm, the owls contributed their haunting calls, and even the coyote joined in with careful, measured howls. It was the most beautiful sound Zara had ever heard. A symphony of voices that spoke of connection, understanding, and joy. And at the center of it all was her daughter, conducting this impossible orchestra with gestures and sounds that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than learning. The glowing symbols in the dirt began to pulse faster, and the light spread outward from them like ripples on a pond. Where the light touched, the grass grew greener, flowers bloomed out of season, and even the air seemed to shimmer with new life. "The healing spreads," Iris explained, her voice returning to its normal baby tones but retaining that impossible wisdom. "When love defeats fear, when different kinds reach across the spaces between them, the whole world grows stronger." Marcus reached out with trembling fingers to touch one of the glowing symbols. The moment his skin made contact, his eyes widened with understanding that went beyond words. "I can hear them," he whispered in amazement. "Not their voices, but their thoughts, their feelings. They're all saying the same thing. Thank you. They're thanking us for remembering what we forgot." The forest animals began to move in a pattern that was clearly ceremonial. They formed concentric circles around the farmyard, each species taking its place in what looked like an ancient ritual. The bears stood in the center ring closest to the family, followed by the deer, then the smaller animals with the birds creating an outer circle by landing on fence posts and tree branches. "What happens now?" Zara asked, though she wasn't sure if she was talking to Iris, to Marcus, or to the assembled creatures themselves. Her daughter looked up at her with eyes that held love, wisdom, and something that might have been sadness. "Now comes the hard part," Iris said softly. "Now we have to choose whether to keep this gift or let it fade away like it did before. The old agreements can be renewed, but only if humans are ready to remember that they are not separate from the rest of creation." The weight of that choice settled over Zara like a blanket. She looked at her husband, seeing the same mixture of wonder and uncertainty in his eyes that she felt in her own heart. "What would it mean," Marcus asked, "to renew these old agreements?" Before Iris could answer, a new sound reached them from the direction of the main road. It was the rumble of multiple engines, growing closer. Through the dust being kicked up by the approaching vehicles, Zara could make out the shapes of several trucks and cars heading toward their farm. The animals in the ceremonial circles began to stir restlessly. The mother bear lifted her massive head and sniffed the air, her expression changing from peaceful to wary. Whatever was coming, it was bringing an energy that the wild creatures didn't like. "Who could that be?" Zara asked, though a cold feeling in her stomach suggested she already knew. Marcus stood up, his face grim. "I might have mentioned something in town about seeing unusual animal activity around our place. You know how fast word spreads in a small community." The vehicles were close enough now that Zara could see their occupants, men with cameras and equipment, people in official-looking uniforms, and what appeared to be a news van bringing up the rear of the convoy. The glowing symbols in the dirt began to flicker, their light growing dim and uncertain. The animals' ceremonial formation started to break apart as some of the more nervous creatures began backing toward the safety of the forest. Iris looked up at her parents with an expression of urgency that was heartbreaking to see on such a young face. "They don't understand," she said, her voice tight with worry. "They'll try to study and measure and explain away what can only be felt with the heart. If they succeed, the connections will break again, and it might be generations before another chance comes." The first truck pulled into their driveway, followed quickly by the others. Men began jumping out, their voices loud and excited as they pointed toward the assembled animals and the strange glowing marks in the dirt. "We have to choose now," Iris whispered urgently. "All of us together. Do we trust in what we've learned, or do we let fear win again?" Zara looked at the approaching strangers, then at the animals who had trusted them enough to reveal this ancient secret, then at her daughter, whose impossible gifts had started it all. The choice wasn't just about their family anymore. It was about something much larger, something that could affect the relationship between humans and nature for generations to come. The mother bear took a step forward and looked directly into Zara's eyes. In that gaze, she saw a question that cut straight to the heart of everything. "Are you brave enough to believe in magic?" Before Zara could answer, the first stranger reached them. He was a tall man in a khaki uniform with a badge that read, "Wildlife Control." His eyes were fixed on the mother bear with the kind of intensity that made Zara's blood run cold. "Ma'am, you need to step away from that animal immediately," he said, his hand moving toward something on his belt. "We've had reports of unusual bear behavior in this area. That's a dangerous wild animal, and it's showing signs of disease or rabies." "No," Zara said firmly, stepping protectively in front of the bear. "You don't understand. She's not dangerous. She's not sick. Something amazing is happening here." The man's expression hardened. "Ma'am, I'm trained to handle wildlife situations. That bear has lost its natural fear of humans, which is always a sign of illness. Please move away so we can tranquilize it safely." Behind him, more people were emerging from the vehicles. A woman with a large camera was already filming, her lens focused on the glowing symbols in the dirt. Two men in lab coats were setting up equipment that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. Another uniformed officer was speaking rapidly into a radio, calling for backup. The animals in the ceremonial circles began to panic. The deer bounded toward the forest in graceful leaps, their white tails flashing like warning signals. The raccoons chittered nervously as they scrambled up the nearest trees. Even the owls took flight, their wings beating silently as they disappeared into the gathering dusk. But the mother bear didn't move. She stood her ground beside Zara, her massive body radiating calm strength. Her cub pressed close to her side, looking up at the approaching humans with curiosity rather than fear. "Wait," Marcus said, stepping forward with his hands raised peacefully. "Officer, I'm the owner of this property. These animals aren't sick. They're doing something I've never seen before, something important." The wildlife officer looked at Marcus with the kind of patience usually reserved for small children. "Sir, I understand this might seem unusual to a civilian, but bears don't gather in groups like this. They don't approach humans without showing aggression. This behavior indicates neurological damage, probably from a brain parasite." "Then explain this," Zara said, kneeling down and placing her hand on one of the glowing symbols. The moment her skin made contact, the symbol flared with brilliant light that spread through the entire circle. The effect was immediate and undeniable. The grass around them grew visibly greener. Flowers bloomed in fast forward motion, and the air itself seemed to sparkle with energy. The camera woman gasped and nearly dropped her equipment. The scientists stopped their setup and stared with open mouths. Even the wildlife officer took an involuntary step backward. "What the hell?" one of the lab-coated men whispered. Iris reached out from Zara's arms and touched another symbol. This time, the light that erupted was even brighter, and something impossible happened. Every person present could suddenly hear what the animals were thinking. The mother bear's voice filled their minds, not as words, but as pure emotion and meaning. "We have waited so long for the barriers to fall. Your kind forgot the old songs, but this little one remembers. She is a bridge between worlds." The bear cub's thoughts were simpler but just as clear. "The bright-haired human saved me. Her baby speaks the true language. Why do these other humans feel so afraid?" From the forest came a chorus of animal voices, all thinking variations of the same message. The healing time has come. The old agreements can be restored, but only if the humans choose love over fear. The wildlife officer staggered, his hand pressed to his forehead as if fighting a severe headache. "This isn't possible. Animals don't have complex thoughts. They don't communicate in concepts." "Don't they?" Iris asked, her young voice carrying impossible authority. She looked directly at the officer, and when their eyes met, he froze completely. "I can see your thoughts too," she said softly. "You became a wildlife officer because you loved animals when you were little. You had a pet rabbit named Chester who understood every word you said. You knew animals were intelligent then, but adults told you it was just imagination." The man's face went pale. "How could you know about Chester?" "I never told anyone about how he used to comfort you when your parents fought, about how he seemed to know when you were sad and would hop into your lap without being called, about how you cried for weeks when he died because you felt like you'd lost your best friend." Tears began to stream down the officer's face. "That's impossible. You're just a baby. How could you possibly—" "Because the connection was never really broken," Iris explained gently. "It was just hidden by people who were too afraid to believe in something they couldn't control or measure." The scientist with the radio had stopped talking to his dispatcher and was staring at the scene with growing amazement. "Control. You're not going to believe this. We need to send the full research team. This is bigger than unusual animal behavior. This is something completely new." But before he could continue his transmission, something unexpected happened. The radio crackled with static, then went completely dead. The camera woman's equipment began to malfunction, the display showing nothing but colored snow. Even the scientists' measurement devices started giving impossible readings before shutting down entirely. "The technology can't process what's happening here," Marcus realized aloud. "It's like the energy is too pure for machines to understand." Iris nodded seriously. "The old agreements were made between living hearts, not mechanical minds. Machines can measure the physical world, but they cannot touch the connections between souls." The mother bear stepped closer to the wildlife officer, who was still crying over memories of his childhood rabbit. She lowered her massive head until it was level with his, then made that same impossible sound, part growl, part purr, part something beyond animal communication. Suddenly, the man's eyes widened with recognition. "Chester," he whispered. "You sound like Chester used to sound when he was trying to tell me something important." The bear nodded, actually nodded, and the man reached out with trembling fingers to touch her fur. The moment contact was made, he gasped as if he'd been struck by lightning. She's saying that she forgives us, all of us, for forgetting how to listen, for building walls between our worlds. She says animals have been waiting patiently for humans to remember the old connection. The other strangers watched in stunned silence as their colleague, a trained professional who dealt with dangerous wildlife every day, knelt in the dirt beside a massive bear and wept with joy. "This changes everything," the camera woman whispered, though her equipment was still completely non-functional. "If this is real, if animals are really this intelligent, this connected, then we've been wrong about everything," one of the scientists finished. "Our entire understanding of consciousness, of intelligence, of what it means to be alive, it's all been based on the assumption that humans are somehow separate and superior." Iris looked around at the assembled adults with an expression of hope mixed with concern. "The choice is still before you," she said. "You can return to your old ways of thinking, dismiss this as hallucination or trickery, or you can choose to believe what your hearts are telling you." The wildlife officer looked up from where he knelt beside the mother bear. "What would it mean? To choose to believe? It would mean admitting that the way we've been treating the natural world is wrong," Marcus said slowly, understanding dawning in his voice. "It would mean acknowledging that every animal we've caged or killed or displaced has been a conscious being with thoughts and feelings as real as our own. It would mean changing everything about how human society operates," the scientist added, his voice heavy with the weight of implications. "Our food systems, our entertainment, our research methods, all of it would have to be reconsidered." Zara felt the weight of the moment settling over all of them like a blanket. This wasn't just about one family's magical encounter with wild animals anymore. This was about the possibility of healing a fundamental break between humanity and the rest of the living world. But then she heard something that made her blood freeze, the sound of more vehicles approaching, their engines much louder than the first group. Through the dust cloud being kicked up on the road, she could see the distinctive shapes of military vehicles. The mother bear's head snapped up, her expression immediately shifting from peaceful to alert. The few animals that had remained in the area began to retreat toward the forest, their earlier calm replaced by instinctive fear. "What's that?" Zara asked, though the cold feeling in her stomach told her she already knew. The scientist with the broken radio looked guilty. "Before the equipment died, I managed to get through to my supervisors. This kind of anomaly, they would have contacted federal authorities immediately." "Federal authorities?" Marcus's voice was tight with anger. "You called the government on us?" "Standard protocol for unexplained phenomena," the man said defensively. "If there's some kind of new energy source here, or if this represents a biological mutation—" "It represents hope," Iris said, her young voice cutting through the adult conversation with startling clarity. "It represents the possibility of healing something that's been broken for thousands of years. And now you've invited people who will want to capture it, study it, control it." The military convoy was close enough now that they could see soldiers moving around inside the vehicles. This wasn't just a scientific investigation team. This was a full military response to what they perceived as a potential threat. The mother bear made a low, rumbling sound that every person present felt in their bones. It wasn't aggressive, but it was clearly a warning. She began backing toward the forest, gently nudging her cub ahead of her. "They're leaving," the wildlife officer said with genuine sadness in his voice. "We scared them away." Not just them, Zara realized, looking around at their now empty farmyard. All of them. The connection is breaking. The glowing symbols in the dirt were already beginning to fade, their light dimming as the magical moment slipped away. The impossible energy that had filled the air was dissipating like morning mist in sunlight. "Wait," the camera woman called out suddenly. "Please, don't go. We can protect you. We can tell the world what really happened here." But the mother bear paused only long enough to look back at Iris one final time. The communication that passed between them was wordless but clear to everyone present. The bear was saying goodbye, but also something else, something that sounded like a promise. "She says this isn't the end," Iris translated, her voice growing smaller and more childlike as the magic faded. "She says the seeds have been planted, and they will grow when the time is right." The first military vehicle pulled into the farmyard just as the last of the animals disappeared into the forest. Soldiers began jumping out, their equipment and attitudes completely different from the wildlife officers and scientists. These were people trained to view any unknown situation as a potential threat. "Nobody move," a commanding voice shouted. "This area is now under federal investigation. We need everyone to remain exactly where they are." But as the soldiers spread out across the farmyard, their sophisticated detection equipment found nothing unusual. The glowing symbols had faded completely, leaving only normal dirt. Their instruments detected no abnormal energy readings, no signs of the impossible events that had just taken place. "There's nothing here, sir," one of the soldiers reported. "No radiation, no electromagnetic anomalies, no evidence of unusual activity." The commanding officer looked around with growing frustration. The report said there were glowing symbols in the ground and animals displaying impossible behavior. The wildlife officer stood up slowly, his face still wet with tears but his expression carefully neutral. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. We did observe some unusual animal groupings, but nothing that couldn't be explained by normal territorial behavior." Zara stared at him in shock. After everything he had experienced, after touching the mother bear and hearing her thoughts, he was lying to protect them. One by one, the other witnesses followed his lead. The scientists reported equipment malfunctions but no concrete evidence of anomalous phenomena. The camera woman claimed her footage had been corrupted by technical difficulties. Within an hour, the military convoy was packing up to leave, their investigation concluding that they had responded to a false alarm. But as they prepared to go, the commanding officer approached Zara and Marcus directly. "Ma'am, sir, I need you to understand something," he said in a voice that was polite but carried an unmistakable undertone of threat. "Sometimes people think they see things that aren't really there. Sometimes stress or isolation can cause people to imagine events that feel very real but are actually products of psychological pressure." "Are you suggesting we're crazy?" Zara asked, holding Iris protectively. "I'm suggesting that if anyone were to claim they witnessed impossible events on this property, it might indicate they need professional help," the officer replied smoothly. "The kind of help that sometimes requires extended stays in specialized facilities." The message was clear. Keep quiet about what happened, or face consequences that could separate their family forever. After the military vehicles disappeared down the road, the small group of original witnesses stood together in the gathering darkness. The farmyard looked exactly as it had that morning, with no trace of the miracles that had occurred. "So, what now?" the camera woman asked quietly. "Do we pretend it never happened?" Iris looked up at her parents with eyes that held both sadness and determination. "The connection isn't really broken," she said in her normal baby voice, though the wisdom in her tone remained. "It's just sleeping again. But now there are people who remember what it feels like to hear the animal's thoughts. And someday, when the fear grows smaller and the love grows stronger, it will wake up again." The wildlife officer knelt down to Iris's level. "Will you remember us when that happens? Will you remember that some humans are ready to listen?" Iris reached out and touched his face with her tiny hand. "I'll remember. And so will they. The animals never really forget. They're just waiting for us to be brave enough to remember too. As the last of the strangers drove away, leaving only Zara, Marcus, and Iris on their quiet farm, the family stood together looking out at the forest where their new friends had disappeared. The night was filled with normal sounds: crickets chirping, an owl hooting in the distance, the gentle hum of the irrigation sprayer continuing its eternal journey across their fields. But if they listened very carefully, they could still hear something else underneath those ordinary sounds. It was faint, almost too quiet to detect, but it was there. A harmony of voices singing an ancient song about connection, understanding, and the patience of love waiting for fear to finally let go. 3 weeks passed without incident. The farm returned to its normal rhythm of irrigation cycles, crop maintenance, and the endless work of keeping a small operation profitable. Marcus threw himself into his duties with renewed energy, though Zara noticed he spent more time than usual standing at the edge of their property, looking toward the forest with an expression of longing. Iris seemed to develop normally for a child her age, babbling and playing with her toys, as if nothing extraordinary had ever happened. But sometimes, late at night, Zara would hear her daughter making soft sounds through the baby monitor. Sounds that seemed almost like she was having conversations with someone who wasn't there. The strangest change was in the animals around their farm. Where once they had been cautious and quick to flee, now they lingered at the edges of the cleared land, watching the family with obvious curiosity. The mother bear and her cub were never seen again, but other creatures began to appear with increasing frequency. A family of deer grazed boldly in their vegetable garden each morning, but instead of eating the crops, they seemed to be carefully tending them. The plants they touched grew larger and healthier than anything Zara had ever seen. When she mentioned this to Marcus, he just shrugged and said maybe they were imagining things. But Zara knew they weren't imagining the way the raccoons had organized themselves into work crews, arriving each evening to repair damage to their fence posts and irrigation lines, or how the owls had begun roosting in strategic positions around their property, creating what looked like a surveillance network. The most unsettling change was in Iris herself. While she appeared to be developing normally during the day, her sleep was filled with vivid dreams that seemed to spill over into the waking world. Zara would often find her daughter standing in her crib in the middle of the night, making gestures toward the window as if directing some kind of invisible orchestra. One morning, Zara woke to find muddy paw prints leading from the forest to Iris's bedroom window, then back again. The prints belonged to no animal she could identify. They were too large for a dog, too small for a bear, and had an odd shape that looked almost like a cross between paw and hand. "Marcus," she said, showing him the strange tracks. "Something was here last night. Something came right up to the house." Her husband examined the prints with growing concern. "These don't match any animal I know. And look at this. They're arranged in pairs, like whatever made them was walking upright." That evening, they decided to keep watch. They took turns sitting by Iris's window, but for hours nothing happened. The night was quiet except for the usual sounds of rural Nebraska: wind through the wheat, the distant call of coyotes, the mechanical hum of their irrigation system. Then, just after midnight, Iris began to make those soft, conversational sounds in her sleep. As her baby voice filled the room, the temperature dropped noticeably. Frost began to form on the inside of the window, creating patterns that looked almost like writing in a language neither parent could read. "Zara," Marcus whispered, his voice tight with fear. "Look outside." She followed his gaze and gasped. Standing at the edge of their yard was a figure that defied explanation. It was tall and lean, covered in what looked like fur but moved with the fluid grace of something that walked on 2 legs. Its eyes reflected the moonlight like an animal's, but its posture was unmistakably intelligent, almost human. "What is that?" Zara breathed. Before Marcus could answer, Iris sat up in her crib and looked directly at the window. The moment her eyes focused on the mysterious figure, it raised one arm, or paw, or something in between, in what was clearly a greeting. Iris waved back. The creature stepped closer to the house, and in the better light they could see it more clearly. It had the general shape of a person, but was covered in thick, dark fur. Its face was a blend of human and animal features with intelligent eyes that held an unsettling familiarity. "It's watching Iris," Marcus said, his voice barely audible, like it's protecting her. As if it had heard him, the creature turned its gaze toward the window where they were hidden. When it looked at them, Zara felt a jolt of recognition that made her heart skip a beat. Those eyes, she had seen them before in the forest, looking out at her with impossible intelligence. "The mother bear," she whispered. "That's her, isn't it? But how—" The creature nodded once, slowly, as if confirming her guess. Then it did something that made both parents stumble backward in shock. It spoke. "The change has begun in me," it said in a voice that was partly growl, partly whisper, but somehow completely understandable. "The old agreements are awakening more strongly than expected. I am becoming what my people were before the great forgetting." Iris clapped her hands together in delight and began babbling excitedly. The creature, the mother bear in her new form, listened carefully to every sound, nodding as if they were having a perfectly normal conversation. "She says the transformation is happening to others as well," the bear creature explained, translating Iris's baby talk with shocking accuracy. "Animals who were touched by the old magic are remembering their true nature. We are becoming the bridges between worlds that we were always meant to be." Marcus sank into a chair, his face pale. "This is impossible. Animals don't transform into whatever you are. They don't suddenly start walking upright and speaking English." "Don't they?" the creature asked, tilting its head in a gesture that was still recognizably bear-like despite its new form. "Or have you simply forgotten what was always possible when love defeats fear?" Zara found herself moving closer to the window, drawn by something she couldn't name. "Are you still her? The mother bear who saved us that day?" "I am more myself than I have ever been," came the reply. "The form I wore before was true, but incomplete. This is what I was always becoming. What all of us were becoming before humans forgot how to see us clearly." The creature raised its other arm, and Zara could see that its hands, for they were definitely hands now, though still clawed, were holding something. It was a bundle of flowers, but not any flowers that grew naturally in Nebraska. These bloomed with colors that seemed to shift and change in the moonlight, and they glowed with the same soft radiance that had surrounded the symbols in the dirt. "A gift," the bear creature said, setting the bouquet on their windowsill. "From all of us who remember. The change is spreading, but slowly. There will be others who need to choose between fear and wonder." Iris began making more urgent sounds, and the creature's expression grew serious as it listened. "She says there are people coming. People who have been watching your farm since the day the agreements were first renewed. They know something happened here, and they will not be as easily fooled as the military was." A chill ran down Zara's spine that had nothing to do with the cold air. What kind of people? "The kind who believe that anything they cannot control must be destroyed," the creature replied. "They have ways of watching that do not require machines. They have been gathering others like themselves, people who fear change more than they love life." As if summoned by the conversation, the sound of vehicles reached them from the main road. But these weren't the official government cars they had seen before. These engines sounded different, quieter, more purposeful, like hunters approaching their prey. The bear creature's posture immediately shifted to one of alertness. They come tonight because they think you are most vulnerable. They know that the child is the key to everything. The key to what? Marcus demanded, his paternal instincts overriding his shock. To the full awakening, the creature explained. Your daughter is not just a bridge between our worlds. She is the catalyst that can make the change permanent. In her, the old agreements are not just remembered but reborn. The vehicle sounds were getting closer, and now they could see headlights cutting through the darkness, moving slowly and deliberately toward their farm. How many? Zara asked, surprised by the calmness in her own voice. The creature closed its eyes and seemed to listen to something beyond the range of human hearing. 6 vehicles, 23 people, armed, but not with weapons meant for humans. What do you mean? Networks. Tranquilizer guns, containment equipment. They do not come to destroy, they come to capture. They want to take the child somewhere they can study her, control her, use her abilities for their own purposes. Iris began to cry, not the normal fussing of a tired baby, but a wail of genuine distress that seemed to echo with unnatural resonance. The flowers on the windowsill pulsed brighter in response to her cries, and somewhere in the distance other voices began to answer. Animal voices. They're coming to help, Marcus realized, looking toward the forest where shadows were beginning to move between the trees. Some of them, the bear creature agreed, but not all have completed their transformation. Many are still bound by their old forms, still limited by instincts that tell them to flee from human aggression. The first vehicle turned into their driveway, its headlights now clearly visible through their front windows. Behind it came the others, spreading out to surround the farmhouse in a coordinated pattern that spoke of military training and careful planning. We need to run, Zara said, grabbing Iris from her crib. We need to get out of here before they trap us. But the bear creature shook its head. There is nowhere to run that they cannot follow. Their kind has been hunting unusual phenomena for generations. They have resources, connections, patience. If you flee tonight, you will spend the rest of your lives looking over your shoulders. Then what do we do? The creature looked directly at Iris, who had stopped crying and was now watching the approaching vehicles with an expression of concentration that seemed far too mature for her age. We make a different choice, the bear creature said. We stop hiding what we are and show them the truth they fear most, that love is stronger than any weapon they can bring against us. Car doors began slamming shut outside as the intruders organized themselves for what was clearly a coordinated assault on their home. Voices carried through the night air, professional and businesslike, as they discussed positions and entry points. Containment Team Alpha, take the north side. Beta Team, you have the south. Remember, we need the child unharmed. Everyone else is expendable if necessary. Zara's blood ran cold at those words, but Iris reached up and touched her mother's face with tiny fingers that seemed to carry warmth and reassurance. Trust, the baby said clearly, her first word in weeks. Trust in what we learned. The bear creature nodded approvingly. She is right. The old agreements were never about power or control. They were about trust between different kinds of life. If you trust now, if you believe in what you experienced, then you give us permission to show these hunters what real connection looks like. Heavy footsteps approached the house from multiple directions. Professional voices coordinated their approach with military precision. Someone was setting up equipment that hummed with electronic energy. They're jamming communications, Marcus realized, looking at his cell phone's dead screen. They don't want us calling for help. But they cannot jam the connections that matter, the bear creature said with something that might have been a smile. Watch. She, for Zara was now certain this transformed being was still fundamentally female, still fundamentally a mother protecting her young. Raised her head and made a sound that was unlike anything Zara had ever heard. It started as a bear's roar, but transformed into something musical, something that seemed to carry meaning beyond mere noise. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. From every direction around their farm came answering calls. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. From every direction around their farm came answering calls. Not just from a few animals, but from what sounded like every creature within miles. The night filled with a symphony of voices that rose and fell in patterns that clearly constituted some form of communication. "What are they saying?" Zara whispered. "They're saying yes," Iris answered in her clear, impossible voice. "Yes to the change. Yes to becoming what they were always meant to be. Yes to protecting the bridge between worlds." The footsteps outside suddenly stopped. The professional voices fell silent. Someone whispered urgently into a radio, but the only response was static. Then the transformation began. Through the windows, Zara could see shapes moving in the darkness around their house. But these weren't the familiar forms of forest animals. These were beings in various stages of change, some still mostly animal but standing upright, others nearly human but retaining claws, fur, and the enhanced senses of their original forms. A stag with antlers that glowed like crystals stepped into the circle of light cast by the intruders' vehicles. Its eyes held intelligence that made several of the armed men take involuntary steps backward. A pack of wolves emerged from the shadows, but they moved with the coordinated precision of a military unit, their transformation allowing them to blend pack instincts with strategic thinking. High above, the sky filled with birds that flew in formations no natural flock had ever achieved, their enhanced awareness allowing them to coordinate their movements with impossible precision. "This is not possible," someone outside said, their voice tight with fear. "Animals don't organize like this. They don't coordinate attacks." "We are not attacking," the bear creature called out, her voice carrying clearly across the farmyard. "We are simply showing you what you have forgotten, that intelligence takes many forms and love creates connections that no weapon can break." A new voice responded from the darkness, human, but filled with authority and cold determination. "Stand down immediately. This area is under federal jurisdiction. Any interference with our operation will be met with lethal force." The bear creature's expression grew sad but determined. "And there it is," she said quietly to Zara and Marcus, "the choice that defines everything. When faced with something they cannot understand or control, they choose violence over wonder." Iris began to glow. It started as a soft radiance emanating from her skin, but it quickly grew brighter until the entire room was filled with warm, golden light. The light didn't hurt to look at, but it seemed to penetrate everything it touched, revealing truths that had been hidden. In that impossible illumination, everyone present, the family, the transformed animals, even the armed intruders, could suddenly see the connections that bound all living things together. Streams of light flowed between every creature, creating a web of relationships that stretched from the smallest insect to the largest predator. "Beautiful," Marcus whispered, tears streaming down his face as he saw for the first time the true complexity of the world around them. But the revelation wasn't limited to their immediate area. The light continued to spread, racing outward like ripples on a pond, touching every living thing for miles around. And as it touched them, they too began to transform. Farm animals stood up on their hind legs and looked around with new awareness. Wild creatures emerged from hiding places they had used for generations, no longer bound by instincts that separated them from the larger community of life. Even the plants began to change, their growth accelerating as they reached toward the light with something that looked unmistakably like joy. "What's happening to the world?" Zara asked, her voice filled with wonder and terror in equal measure. "The world is remembering what it always was," the bear creature replied. "Your daughter is not just a bridge between worlds. She is the key that unlocks the potential that was always there, waiting for someone brave enough to turn it." Outside, the armed intruders were facing a reality that no amount of training had prepared them for. Their equipment was failing, their communications were dead, and they were surrounded by beings that challenged every assumption they had about the nature of consciousness and intelligence. Some of them were beginning to lower their weapons, their faces filled with awe rather than fear. But others were raising them higher, their training overriding the evidence of their senses. "Sir," one of them called out to their leader, "I'm not sure our protocols cover this situation." The response came swift and harsh. "Our protocols are clear. Contain the anomaly by any means necessary. If these creatures interfere, they are to be considered hostile targets." The bear creature looked at Zara with eyes that held both sadness and determination. "They will not listen to reason. They will not accept what they cannot control. The choice is before us now. Retreat back into hiding, or stand together and show them that some things are worth protecting no matter the cost." Iris reached out her glowing hands toward the window, her baby voice carrying words that seemed to come from somewhere far older than her young body. "No more hiding, no more fear, time to choose love." The light emanating from her grew brighter still, and in that radiance every transformed creature around their farm began to move forward with purpose and unity that transcended species, transcended the old boundaries between predator and prey, between wild and tame. The final confrontation was about to begin. But as the armed intruders raised their weapons and the transformed creatures moved forward in unity, something unexpected happened that changed everything. One of the armed men, a young soldier who couldn't have been more than 20, suddenly dropped his weapon and fell to his knees. "I can't do this," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. "They're not monsters. They're beautiful." The light from Iris had touched him too, and in that radiance he could see what the others were fighting so hard to deny. Every creature around them, human and animal alike, was connected by threads of light that pulsed with love, with purpose, with a harmony that made violence seem not just wrong, but impossible. "Get up, soldier," his commander barked. "That's an order." But the young man looked up at his superior with tears streaming down his face. "Sir, don't you see it? Don't you see how everything is connected? My grandmother used to tell me stories about times when people could talk to animals, when the world was one big family. I thought they were just fairy tales, but this is what she was trying to tell me." One by one, other members of the assault team began to lower their weapons. The light spreading from Iris wasn't just illuminating the connections between creatures, it was awakening memories that had been buried deep in human hearts for generations. Memories of a time when the barriers between species didn't exist, when communication flowed freely between all forms of life. "This is not happening," the commander said, but his voice had lost its authority. Even he was beginning to see the threads of light, beginning to feel the pull of connection that his training had taught him to suppress. The bear creature stepped forward, no longer cautious but radiating confidence and peace. "It is happening," she said gently. "It was always going to happen. Love doesn't ask permission from fear, it simply is, and eventually it becomes too strong to deny." Marcus found himself walking toward the front door, his fear replaced by a certainty he had never felt before. Zara followed, still holding the glowing iris, whose light continued to spread outward like ripples on an infinite pond. They stepped outside into a world that was transforming before their eyes. The night air shimmered with energy as creatures everywhere completed their evolution. A family of rabbits stood on their hind legs, their eyes bright with new intelligence as they tended to injured plants with careful paws. An old oak tree at the edge of their property began to glow, its branches reaching out to embrace the smaller trees around it in what could only be described as a wooden hug. Even the irrigation sprayer, the machine that had started it all, began to change. Its metal arms, instead of moving in their programmed mechanical pattern, started to dance. Water flowed from its nozzles in patterns that looked like calligraphy, writing messages of growth and renewal across the thirsty earth. "The whole world is waking up," Zara whispered in amazement. "No," Iris said, her young voice carrying ancient wisdom. "The whole world is remembering what it never really forgot. It was just sleeping, waiting for someone to say it was safe to dream again." The commander of the assault team stood frozen, his weapon hanging useless at his side as he watched his carefully planned operation dissolve into something that resembled a celebration more than a battle. His men were scattered across the farmyard, some sitting in the dirt talking earnestly with transformed animals, others lying on their backs staring up at the sky where the birds were painting pictures with their flight patterns. "This wasn't supposed to happen," he said, but the words came out as a whisper rather than a command. The bear creature approached him with the careful patience of a mother dealing with a frightened child. "Nothing that is truly meant to be can be stopped forever," she told him. "You came here to capture something you thought was dangerous, but you found something that is the opposite of danger. You found home." As she spoke, the light continued to spread beyond their farm, racing across the Nebraska plains like dawn breaking over the entire world. In the distance, they could see other farmhouses beginning to glow as the transformation reached them. Animals that had been hiding in barns and fields began to emerge, standing upright, looking around with wonder at their new awareness. The young soldier who had first dropped his weapon stood up and walked toward Iris. "May I?" he asked Zara, gesturing toward her daughter. Zara looked into his eyes and saw nothing but genuine wonder and respect. She nodded, and the soldier knelt down until he was at Iris's eye level. "Thank you," he said simply, "for showing us what we forgot, for reminding us that we're all part of the same family." Iris reached out with one tiny glowing hand and touched his forehead. The moment their skin made contact, his eyes widened with understanding that went beyond words. She says this is just the beginning," he whispered. "She says the earth has been waiting so long for humans to remember how to listen." Around them, the transformation continued to spread and deepen. The distinctions between wild and domestic, between natural and artificial, began to blur and disappear. Garden vegetables grew alongside wildflowers in patterns that were both beautiful and purposeful. Technology began to merge with nature in ways that enhanced rather than dominated. The irrigation system now worked in harmony with the plant's actual needs. The fence posts sprouted leaves and became living boundaries that welcomed rather than excluded. The commander finally let his weapon fall to the ground. "I don't understand what's happening," he admitted, his voice filled with confusion and something that might have been hope. "Understanding isn't required," Marcus told him gently. "Acceptance is enough. Trust is enough. Love is enough." As if summoned by those words, creatures began emerging from every direction. Not just the transformed animals they had already seen, but beings that seemed to exist somewhere between the physical and spiritual realms. Lights danced between the trees that might have been fireflies or might have been something far more magical. The air itself seemed to sing with voices that spoke in harmonies rather than words. Iris began to giggle, the sound carrying across the transformed landscape like music. Her laughter was answered by similar sounds from every direction, the joy of creatures discovering they were no longer alone, no longer separate, no longer afraid. "What happens now?" Zara asked the bear creature, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. "Now, we begin again," came the reply. "Not as humans and animals living in fear of each other, but as family members who have finally remembered they belong together. The old agreements are restored, but this time they will not be forgotten." The sun began to rise over the transformed landscape, painting everything in shades of gold and rose that seemed more vivid than any sunrise Zara had ever seen. In that light, she could see that the changes weren't limited to their farm or even their region. The glow on the horizon suggested that the transformation was spreading across continents, touching every living thing with the possibility of connection and understanding. Iris looked up at her parents with eyes that held both the innocence of a baby and the wisdom of ages. "The scary part is over," she said in her clear, impossible voice. "Now comes the beautiful part. Now we get to learn how to be family again." The bear creature, the transformed soldiers, the awakened animals, and the human family stood together as the sun rose on a world that was fundamentally different from the one that had existed the day before. It was a world where love had finally grown stronger than fear, where connection had overcome isolation, where the ancient barriers between species had dissolved into something far more beautiful. And in that moment, as Iris's laughter echoed across the transformed earth and was answered by countless voices singing in harmony, they all understood that they were witnessing not an ending, but the most beautiful beginning imaginable. The baby, who had saved a bear cub from an irrigation sprayer, had done something far more extraordinary than anyone could have imagined. She had saved the connection between all living things, and in doing so, she had saved the world itself. The old agreements were restored, the great forgetting was over, the age of remembering had begun, and it all started with one tiny act of love that proved even the smallest heart could hold enough compassion to change everything.